Hi, welcome to the Memos to the President. I'm Ili with the Special Competitive Studies Project. It's really an honor to have Thomas Mason from the Los Alamos National Laboratory on our podcast today. Tom, welcome.
Oh, it's great to be here.
It's great to have you. You represent one of the most famous labs in our nation, in our history. So tell me a little bit about how it is to run one of the most, instrumental and the most important national labs that we have.
Well, Los Alamos is an amazing place. We celebrated our 80th anniversary 2 years ago. And right from the get-go, our role has been to bring the best, most cutting-edge science and technology to bear on the most pressing national security problems. And that's a motivating thing for all of our staff. We've got really dedicated, smart people. And, it's a really exciting time right now. I mean, it's also a challenging time and geopolitically a kind of frightening time. So there's a sense of urgency to our mission that I think actually hasn't been the case for quite some time. Just the events of the last 10 years or so have really heightened the importance of what we're doing.
Let's talk about the changing geopolitical environment. I asked Gemini to do a set of analysis of all the recent speeches and testimonies and whatnot, and he really did an incredible job. And it said that you have a set of strategic preoccupations.
Yes.
With national security being the first one and the most important one given the nature of your work. So can you see, from your vantage point, what has changed from the national security perspective in the last, as you said, 10 years?
Well, the way I have been thinking about this recently, just how Los Alamos' role fits into that broader geopolitical picture is we have entered what I call the fourth age of the lab. The fourth age in the kind of Lord of the Rings sense, right? The third age of Middle-earth ended when Frodo threw the ring into Mount Doom, and we never got to see what the fourth age was, but we knew there'd been this transition. And with Los Alamos, our first stage was the Manhattan Project. You can see the movie. That was obviously a pivotal time. The second age was the Cold War. And so for about 40 years, we built the deterrent that helped ultimately prevail against the Soviet Union. And then at the end of the Cold War, we entered what you might call the post-Cold War period. And that was a period of about 30 years from the end of the 80s until probably 10, 15 years ago. And, during that time, the focus shifted. We were in an era that, for the nuclear deterrent, which is our primary responsibility, we called stockpile stewardship, take care of the stockpile. There were hopes there'd be a declining role for nuclear weapons in regulating international affairs. We focused a lot on nonproliferation. Of course, you had the global war on terror. But that began to change, and, you can pick your favorite time for when it began to change. Right. Putin's speech to the Munich Security Conference in 2007, when he told us what he was going to do, or when he started doing those things in places like Georgia and the first invasion of Ukraine, second invasion of Ukraine, and of course in China with the election of Xi Jinping, and the shift from the peaceful rise strategy that had characterized China's approach for quite some time to a much more muscular approach in terms of foreign policy and defense and so forth. And so really for the last 10 years or so, we've been living in this world where the kind of hope of the post-Cold War period, where it's going to be a flat world, everyone was going to adopt the US playbook in terms of democracy and capitalism, and we ought to do pretty well in that world since we invented that model. We've come to recognize that things have changed again, and we've entered this fourth age. It's still playing out exactly what the contours are going to be, but it certainly has, the character people talk about, the return of great power competition and increasing relevance, unfortunately, for nuclear deterrence again, and tremendous technological and economic competition. There is a military dimension, and certainly with Russia, an active military dimension, but in the case of China, of course, we hope it doesn't gain that military dimension, but it certainly has the technological and economic aspects of a pretty intense competitive situation.
Yeah. So in this new geopolitical environment, how do you see the national lab's mission evolve? because as you mentioned, these were our greatest assets during the Cold War. We have created them, for that purpose. But now you have a different geopolitical environment. You talked about technology really being one of the dominant forces now in the international, relations. How do you see your mission and the lab that you lead evolve during this time?
Well, there's an element that is almost more of a story of continuity in the sense that right now we've embarked on a pretty significant nuclear modernization program. Within the Department of Defense, that's the delivery systems, the platforms, and obviously within the National Nuclear Security Administration that's responsible for Los Alamos, it's the bombs and the warheads. And that's a big effort. It's actually an effort that was really designed and conceived in about 2010, before we'd really recognized how different the world was. So it was really an effort to just modernize the deterrent of the 1980s, basically. And so I think one of the ways that our role's changing is there's now a recognition that for the current environment where we're rapidly approaching a kind of three-peer nuclear nation situation, that deterrent is not really fit for purpose. And so we're being asked to think of different things that we can do to close deterrence gaps. Obviously there's a lot of concerns about the South China Sea, Taiwan Strait sort of situation, and what can we do to deter military conflict there. And then, of course, the other piece of it is the technological economic competition piece where, there's tremendous opportunity associated with all kinds of exciting new, possibilities from, artificial intelligence, synthetic biology, the themes that SCSP has really been championing, which on the one hand have, tremendous opportunity that's created by them, both, business opportunities to tackle important problems in human health, and but also risks and threats associated with them. And part of our job is to actually stay ahead of that and make sure we don't get surprised. And the only way I know how to avoid technological surprise is to get there first.
Right. You have been a big champion of adopting AI, at your lab. Can you talk a little bit about that? How did you approach it? Where did you see the opportunities to adopt AI for your mission set? And then talk a little bit about the China AI competition that I think you have talked a little bit in your last testimony when you were here in Washington last month.
Yeah. Well, we've been using various forms of artificial intelligence for quite some time. Machine learning, different terminologies maybe, but as a tool for dealing with the kind of scientific data that's at the root of what we do. And so we've been actually excited and motivated about that progress for a while. About, I guess, a little over 4 years ago, we were in the process of procuring our next big supercomputer, a machine called Crossroads, which we use to do modeling and simulation as part of that kind of stockpile stewardship program. And at the same time we were getting that mission computer, we were looking at buying a new institutional machine, and we were really interested in this architecture that NVIDIA had developed, both for modeling and simulation, but also the potential it had for data analytics. So we made a deal with HP Enterprises, the system integrator, to get this NVIDIA supercomputer. We put it on order, took delivery about a year ago. And of course, in the intervening time, there's been this huge explosion of interest driven by the large language models that's really, I think, changed people's views of what AI can do. So we were very fortunate that we took delivery of this machine about a year ago. And since then, we've been using it in open science activities to basically develop large language models where the language is physics and chemistry and biology. It's the language of science, in areas like materials science and structural biology, synthetic biology, and so forth. And it's really, I think, opened our eyes to the potential of a technology that basically is going to change the rate of progress in science and engineering. And science is a feedback machine. A breakthrough in one area enables discoveries in another, and so you get this kind of compounding effect. So when you change the slope of human progress, that is going to have a huge, huge impact. And in fact, now we've been working in partnership with OpenAI
Right.
to take that Venado, it's called, supercomputer, into our classified network, so we can start using some of the data that we have that's not in the training bases,
Right.
databases, fortunately, to develop models for our national security nuclear deterrence mission. In fact, the machine just went on to the so-called Red Network about a month ago.
Right.
And OpenAI was willing to share with us their raw model weights, which is not something they've been prepared to do for anyone else. That's kind of their crown jewels. In fact, I think the only reason they were willing to do it is because it was going to go into our classified network. So
Right.
it would have
Right, yeah.
the kind of protection that they would want for that asset. So we're really excited about this next chapter when we can begin to explore how we can impact our missions in deterrence and nonproliferation, counterterrorism, and so forth. And it's not something that I think one can underestimate in terms of, as I said, you're changing the slope of progress, and it's a feedback machine. So that to me says exponential growth. If I
Right.
remember my calculus.
If you would make any guess right now from what you've seen, what do you think are some of the opportunities that will emerge from this?
Well, I think it's actually some of the same areas that we've been already doing work in open science.
Right.
And one of an example, this is a project that we're doing jointly with NVIDIA, using Llama as a platform in open science to try and optimize the yield of fusion capsules. And of course, a couple of years ago, there's tremendous excitement generated when the National Ignition Facility at Livermore,
Right.
crossed over break even.
Right.
And that was a long, painful, expensive process. There's huge investment in the NIF facility, but then more than a decade of painstaking, iterative work to
Right.
try and reach that break-even point. And what you would like to do is get to much higher yield. So now, instead of just 2 or 3 times more energy coming out than went in, you get maybe 10 or 15
Right.
times more energy. Then things really start to get exciting. And each shot on NIF costs about $1 million. And so that's a slow, painstaking, expensive process to iterate the design, try something else, it doesn't work. And so what we've been exploring is using AI and sort of agentic tools to iterate the design of a fusion capsule. And the way that it works is you have an agent that can kind of come up with a hypothesis, based on the data that it's trained on. If this particular design might be good, then it can spawn some jobs to do some numerical calculations and model, what the performance of that might be, discover that it's not so good, make a change, and kind of iterate to increase the yield, and do that in an automated, relatively low-cost way. Now, at the end of the day, you're still going to have to do experiments.
Of course. Yeah.
But if you can reduce the timeline and reduce the cost, then you're going to get there a whole lot faster.
Yeah.
And we'd like to get to high yield, a whole lot faster than we got to break even.
Exactly.
And so that's an example.
I mean, and Tom, as you know, we have a big fusion effort here at SCSP because I think we are at that point as a nation in which we have to make a push because the testing is there, the results are there. We have some tremendous companies also in the fusion space, but I think the government needs to have a clear strategy of how do we get to, really have fusion plants at the end of the day, right? Because I think that's the goal as a country, to have different and diverse sources of energy. Before I jump on the energy question, just quickly on the US-China AI competition, because I
Right.
think you have been pretty vocal about what does that mean, where we are, and how do we stay ahead?
Yeah, well, first off, I think, people maybe misperceive how tight this competition is. I think because of the fact that when large language models burst onto the scene, it was companies like OpenAI and Google, American-based multinational companies that were seen to be in leadership position. People just kind of assumed that was hardwired in, and that was going to be the case forever. And of course, it's really not. It's a much tighter competition. And if you look, there's been a lot of kind of open source intelligence work trying to understand what's going on in China. And I think the summary of that is that the investments in China are at the same scale as the massive private sector investments in the U.S. In terms of the data centers and software development, and people have done things like look at thermal imaging from cooling towers and that sort of thing. However, in the Chinese system, there's no real clear distinction between private sector and public sector, or military defense-related work and non-military defense-related work. So that large effort is absolutely focused on the Chinese objectives in terms of their national security programs, weapons development, and so forth. In the U.S., we have this tremendous advantage of these private investments. That's a huge strategic advantage for us. But in the public sector, we've really been lagging. There is no big national program to leverage that private sector investment for public purposes. And most of the companies involved are for-profit companies. They're making these investments because they see commercial models for revenue around them. And there are some public needs, and I would argue that national security is certainly one of them, where there may not be incentives for the kind of tailored development we need for the sort of tools that can tackle our problems. I mean, to give an obvious example, we're in the business of designing nuclear weapons. There is no commercial market for nuclear weapons. That's actually a good thing. But it means the government is going to have to be finding a model for partnering with industry, leveraging their expertise and investments, but directing it towards kind of public good.
Speaking about protection, you have been pretty vocal about research protection, because I think what we have seen in recent years is, our openness, the research environment would thrive and has been misused by the Chinese. And so how do you think we should approach research protection?
I think this is an area that it's really important to get right, because the U.S. has benefited tremendously from a pretty open research ecosystem. And the driver for that is the desire to go fast. And what we know is that when you get the best minds on problems collaborating in an open environment, you tend to go faster. On the other hand, as you point out, there's been examples, and there are many, unfortunately, where countries that don't have the same view in terms of protection of intellectual property and transparency and the fair use and so forth have basically taken advantage of aspects of our open research ecosystem to advance their aims with no kind of reciprocal benefit. And China is certainly probably the worst offender in this regard. And we can't ignore that. But if our response is to kind of shut down significant aspects of our open innovation system, we will actually be shooting ourselves in the foot. We will be, achieving the aims of Xi Jinping and the Chinese government. And I think there's no better example than some of the talent acquisition programs, the 1,000 Talents program, where those were designed to respond to the fact that the U.S. was really winning the global competition for talent, and millions actually. We had a Million Talents program where millions of people from around the world came to this country to get higher education degrees, advanced degrees, and actually settled here, started companies, worked as researchers, and of course China didn't want to lose their contribution to our talent stream, so they set up these talent acquisition programs to try and lure people back. They operate and have operated in a pretty deceptive way.
They've been pretty successful. In
Yeah, they've
certain
been
areas,
successful to some extent, although we're still actually overall coming out ahead,
Right.
at least for now. If our response is to basically kick everyone out of the country, they don't need a 1,000 Talents program. We just did their work for them.
Right.
So that's why I think it's really, we cannot ignore the abuses. We have to be more diligent, and people need to be more conscious of the risks of collaboration and interaction. So doing nothing is clearly not the right response. But on the other hand, I think an overreaction actually could do more harm
Exactly.
than the losses we're seeking to counter. So I think
Exactly.
it's really important to get this one right.
Yeah. Speaking about people, I mean, the one thing that really fascinates me always when you talk to people that work at Los Alamos or other labs is like the mission-driven, focus that they have. I mean, they can do any other jobs in the world. They can go to private sector, but yet they dedicate their life and career to work on these hard problems on behalf of the government. How do you see the workforce change in recent years? How do you maintain that drive that still keeps people coming and working at these labs?
Yeah, it really is the mission. We've been experiencing a rather unusual period of sustained growth for the last 5 or 6 years because of the geopolitical situation, and a lot of investments are being made to modernize our infrastructure, grow our staff. I think in 2023 was sort of our peak year. We hired about 2,500 new employees, which is a lot for us.
In just 1 year?
In just 1 year, yeah.
Incredible.
As I look at the people who are joining the lab, they're smart, they're dedicated, they are motivated by the mission, the mission combined with the fact that we have absolutely the coolest tools on the planet.
That's true, yeah.
With things like our Venato and Crossroads supercomputers, big accelerators, experimental facilities that generate that data that we need to train the AI. That's always been the attractor. And, it's true that people have other options, and in some cases they may be able to make a lot more money.
Right.
On the other hand, northern New Mexico is an amazing place to live. We're the only lab in the world with a ski hill behind the fence. There are other
I saw you go
attractions.
biking.
Yeah.
Also.
That's right. Yeah, no, New Mexico is great for biking too. Yeah.
No, that's fascinating. Turning on the issue of energy, because you touched a little bit on that with fusion and what we have achieved with the NIF. But you have also been a big proponent of energy, the nuclear energy, and why we have to get the energy strategy right. Not just because where we are, but also the demand that AI will place upon us in the years to come.
Yeah, well, in fact, before I was director at Los Alamos, I was the director of Oak Ridge National Lab. I was there for 19 years, actually, which is a science and energy lab.
Right.
So it is something that I've been, really interested in. If you look, our access to energy really defines our standard of living. And if you, one way to think about it is if you look at the energy consumption of someone living in the United States or in Western Europe or in Japan, and translate that into human equivalents. So we have to eat about 3,000 calories worth of food every day to sustain ourselves. And if you look at our energy consumption, for every man, woman, and child in the United States, it's the equivalent of about 100 human equivalents. So one way to think about it is a family of 4 in the U.S. has 400 energy servants. Those energy servants are keeping us warm in the winter, cooling us down in the summer, transporting us back and forth when we need to go somewhere, enabling our communications. And so our standard of living is defined by our access to energy. And not only that, of course, there are billions of people around the world who don't enjoy that standard of living, who are working very, very hard to achieve it. And so then the question is, where are you going to get it from? And, we know, we've known since the late 1800s that when you burn something, you release energy, and you also release CO2. It's actually the oxidation that's causing the energy to be released. It's intrinsic in any fossil fuel, that you're releasing CO2. We've known, again, since about the end of the 19th century that CO2 is a gas that transmits visible light and absorbs infrared light. That's the origin of the greenhouse effect. And we've known in measurements since the 50s from the top of a volcano in Hawaii that the CO2 levels have been rising because of the burning of fossil fuel. And we know it's tied to the burning of fossil fuel because we can actually look at the isotopics of the carbon and see that the growth is coming from carbon that was sequestered millions of years ago. So, we understand that. And so if we're trying to have a population that enjoys the standard of living that we currently enjoy, so both sustain ours and lift billions of people out of poverty, I don't think it's viable to sort of say, well, as long as the rest of the world stays impoverished, we're okay. So we need to find where that energy is going to come from, and we need to get it in a way that doesn't cause, grave damage to things like the system of agriculture that provides our food. And, those are the sort of things we're concerned about with climate change. So how do you go about doing that? You basically got three choices. You have what we call renewable energy, which is in one form or another, it's all basically solar energy. Wind energy is driven, by the energy from the sun. There's direct photovoltaic. Hydropower, again, it's evaporative that moves the water around and so forth. And that has to be combined with some sort of energy storage to deal with the intermittency. So that's one option. Second option is fission.
Yeah. We
We know how to do that. It works. If we become concerned about the supply of fissile material of U-235, there are options for closing the fuel cycle that would make it, sustainable over the long term. And the third is fusion. And all of those have challenges in terms of economics, in some cases scale, public acceptance. So they're all areas that we can benefit from improvements in technology and research and development to hopefully drive down those costs, tackle the problems of acceptance, associated, for example, long-term storage of waste from fission and so forth. And they're all areas that I think have seen, tremendous improvement over the years. There's more work to be done. But this is totally a solvable problem if we apply ourselves to it.
Right. My last question, Tom, is you represent a really famous lab, an important lab. I think it was made even more important and famous with the release of the movie Oppenheimer, which talks about how we built the Manhattan Project and all those. My question is, if you would have built today a Manhattan Project for AI, I think Secretary Wright was pretty adamant when he visited your lab. How would you go about and do it?
Well, I think that, as I mentioned earlier, the U.S. has a huge advantage because of the innovation and scale of what's going on in our private sector. So we have to figure out what the right sort of kind of public-private partnership model is to take advantage of that expertise and those investments, but direct them in ways that a purely commercial model may not direct them because we're trying to achieve more public sector ends. And actually, the Manhattan Project is an interesting analogy because that was a unique sort of public-private partnership.
Right.
I mean, the movie talks about the creation of the lab. Los Alamos was managed by the University of California. It wasn't actually a government managed activity. And of course, there were big companies like DuPont that were under contract to build the facilities at Hanford and Tennessee Eastman at Y-12 in Oak Ridge and the University of Chicago and so forth. So it was General Grove's approach was to actually leverage the capabilities for research that existed in our universities and the capabilities to do things at scale that existed with these large private companies like DuPont, Tennessee Eastman, and so forth. And the reason he was doing that, it was imperative to get to scale quickly.
Right.
And so a purely public sector model was not well suited to doing that. So that's why this kind of uniquely American invention of the government-owned, contractor-operated entity was developed in 1943
Right.
in response to the urgency of that time. I kind of feel like we're at a similar juncture now with AI, where we need to find a way to go much, much faster than we have been going in the public sector. And we need to do it at a scale that's beyond what we're doing right now. The most important thing we learned using our NVIDIA Venado supercomputer over the last year was that we are not at the scale we need to be at. And so, you know, that probably won't look the same as a 1943 management and operating contract with the University of California to manage Los Alamos National Lab. So, you know, it's not a perfect analogy. We have to figure out new kind of models. I've been really encouraged by how actually excited a lot of the AI labs are to work with our lab.
Yeah.
And the kind of partnerships we've been able to put together. I think we actually have something to offer there in terms of accelerating the path to artificial general intelligence, because, you know, the way things are going now, people are looking at math and science as the way to do that through reinforcement learning. And we have really tough scientific problems. We have really smart people who understand them well, and we have a wealth of data. So I think we can actually help these companies on their mission to achieve artificial and general intelligence, and they will be able to help us in our mission to tackle the most pressing national security challenges.
No, I agree. I mean, the one observation I have is the labs are so much ahead of everybody in terms of AI adoption. I mean, as you said, I believe the race with China is not going to be about the latest models. It's going to be about the adoption and application. And I think the labs are really leading that area right now when it comes to the public sector adoption of AI. So thrilled that what you're doing with OpenAI, and I'm really heartened that OpenAI actually wanted to do this with you.
There has been a change, you know.
Yeah.
I think a couple of years ago, a lot of the tech companies were a little bit leery of getting engaged in national security problems, and I think probably because of the recognition that they're in a bit of an unfair fight with some of their Chinese competitors, that actually there is a national security dimension to this AI race. Has really changed the attitudes. And so as a result, we've been able to do some pretty amazing things working with these companies.
Tom, thank you so much for coming today. It's a pleasure to host you, and best of luck to you and the Los Alamos Labs.
Well, great. Thanks for having me. It's been fun. And you know, I've always enjoyed your podcast. I have a beautiful 45-minute drive to work every day, and it's part of the way I stay on top of what's happening.
Thank you so much.